In the last several weeks, we've been dialoguing back and forth in the presence of God about faith. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. What does it mean, though? What does it mean? Faith now is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Faith then finds itself in substance. Hear it? Faith has to find itself in substance. Meaning, I can have big faith, but small substance. And so my big faith in a small substance does nothing for me. But I can have little faith in great big substance. And that's mustard seed faith that God said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, that you should be able to speak to this mountain and say to this mountain, get up and go sit over there, and it has to obey you. What he's saying is by faith, when you walk by faith, when you talk by faith, when you live by faith, you will quit telling God about your problems. And you'll start telling your problems about the God that you serve. Yeah, that there becomes a time when you've got to quit telling God about your problems. And that you got to tell the problem about your God. And so we're dialoguing in faith for the last several weeks, and we were in Abraham. We were in Hebrews 11. We spoke about Abraham, and we spoke about Moses. And then last week we covered the first few verses, Enoch and Noah and Abel last week. We're going to keep moving ahead in Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to go to Hebrews 11 and 6. Y'all know that we started the year here. Hebrews 11 and 6, the Christian Standard Bible, it says, now without faith, it is impossible to please God, since the one who draws near to him must believe that he is, that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him. Why is that important? Because if I don't believe first that he is, then there's a problem. But if I don't believe that he is going to reward me, if I believe he's going to punish me for finding him, then what good is it walking by faith? But it says that without faith it's impossible, because if we're going to draw near to him first, we must believe that he is, that he desires communion with us, that he desires partnership with us, that he desires relationship with us, and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. That he's rewarding us when we seek him, that he will make himself found. That's what that means. That if you seek him, he'll make himself found. That your job's not to find, your job is to seek him, and he makes himself found. That it reveals himself. That God cannot be found, God must be revealed. He must show you who he is. We cannot find Christ in and of ourselves. We have to be shown who Christ is. That's what it means. That without faith, it's impossible. Since the one who draws near to him must believe that he is, he exists, and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. Now, I just want to teach for a little bit. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11. Here it is. I'm just going to teach for a few moments. We're going to go to the mother of the nation of Israel. We talked Abraham and we talked Moses, and for a few moments, we're going to just teach for a little bit, draw some nuggets, and we're going to get you out of here before kickoff. Here it is. It says, this is the Christian Standard Bible. If you've got it, then great. But if you didn't bring your Bible or don't have it on your phone, or your phone is slower than some of the other ones that are here, then we've brought it to you on your screen. It says, by faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. And we're going to stay right there for a few moments. We're going to read it one more time. By faith, Even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. Means that faith then is living not just in expectation, Dustin, but in order for us to really live by faith, in faith, through faith, faith is not just living in expectation, it's living in anticipation. Yeah, I can expect something I don't anticipate, but I can't anticipate it without first expecting it. Yeah, that I am looking at a reality revealed through God, and I am holding on to that reality even though my facts don't speak to that reality. Hear it? That faith, again, depends on the substance that you've put it in. And so if we're going to learn from these great fathers and mothers of the faith, then we have to go back to Genesis, where the Bible discusses them, gives us their story. And we've got to go back to the Old Testament and read some of their stories. So here it is, the first woman of the faith. This is Abraham's wife, Sarah. And the thing about Abraham and Sarah's faith, the Bible says that she was unable to have children. She's 90 years old before she gives birth to Isaac. 90 years old. Listen, I don't know about y'all, but Lady Ebony ain't having no babies at 90. Listen, crawling, changing diapers. No, not at 90. Not at 90. Not at 90. No. I can't do it. I can't, not even at 40. I can't do it. So, but at 90, she has Isaac. And the reason that Abraham and Sarah's faith is so important is because both of them had reached the point they could not reproduce. I need you to hear it. Both of them reached the point they can't reproduce. So since they can't reproduce, something has to happen in their bodies to defy nature. I need you to see it. That Sarah's body can't reproduce. Abraham's body can't reproduce. That's nature running its course. That's the law of nature. But God has to then, in order for them to reproduce, defy the law of nature. And so Hebrews also says, we learned that their bodies were as good as dead. That's what the writer of Hebrews says, that their bodies were as good as dead. So hold up. Their bodies have reached a point they cannot reproduce. Sarah is past the age. She's past the time. She's past the time. Her allotted time of reproduction has expired. Their body is then as good as dead. So in order for God to reproduce through Abraham and Sarah, he has to bring two dead things back to life. I need you to see it. That in order for God to reproduce the children of Israel through Abraham and Sarah, whose bodies are good as dead, he cannot reproduce until he brings both things back to life. And so he brings them back to life by putting a seed on the inside of the man to touch the seed on the inside of the woman. I need you to see it. And so both bodies are dead. They've been trying and can't get it done. But something happens and life hits his seed and life hits her womb. And out of these two dead things comes life, and the children of Israel are produced. Now watch it. The thing that messes me up, Dr. Kaya, is that if I think about Sarah's story, she doesn't look faithful. If I really consider her story, she doesn't really look faithful. If I think about who Sarah is, she don't look faithful. But she's like us men. Men, we walk down that aisle, standing there, see the bride, she come on in. Yeah. She walk on down the aisle and we grab her hand and we look her dead in the eye. We look her dead in the eye and we speak them vows. And the preacher says, Now I present to you husband and wife. We kiss, walk on out, lie to everybody, because we know good and well we are not ready to be a husband. What they really should say is that he's going to be trained to be a husband over the next several years. But what happens is at marriage, we get credit for what we are not yet. We get called husband, not knowing how to really be it. We get called a good husband, not ever having been it. And so when the Bible says that she's faithful, maybe she's getting credit for something that she wasn't at first. Maybe she wasn't faithful at first and then finds herself being faithful. Because who does the Bible say was faithful? I need you to see it. If we consider the name by faith, even who? But that's not her name. Yeah, not at first. I need you to see something. Let's go back to Genesis. Let's talk Genesis. Because there's something that happens in Genesis. Let's go to Genesis chapter 16, verse 2. Y'all see this name? Same woman, but what's the name? Sarai. Her name is Sarai when we meet her in Genesis chapter 11 or in chapter 12. And in Genesis chapter 12, this is what happens. In Genesis chapter 12, God calls Abraham and says, Abram, get up. Leave from there. I need you to go somewhere. I'm going to show you where to go. Go where I'm going to show you. He takes his wife, Lot follows, and they start walking out of the Chaldees, Ur of the Chaldees, in towards the promised land. So they're walking away from one thing into another thing. Abram then has God tell him, Abram, I'm going to do something for you. I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to make a multitude come out of your womb, come out of your seed. Abram, I'm going to do something great for you. I'm going to make your name great, Abram. Not only am I going to show you a new land, not only am I going to make a great nation come from your seed, not only am I going to make your name great, but anybody that mess with you, I'm going to mess with them. And anybody that blesses you, I'm going to bless them. And so he gives Abram the promise, and here it is, this chapter 16, verse 2, they're walking in the promised land now. They have gone from Ur of the Chaldees. They have gone into the promised land. They're now walking in Canaan. They're walking in Canaan, and they're living in Canaan. And watch what happens as they're aging. When they first leave, Abram is 75 years old when they first leave. 75. By the time we get to, that's chapter 12. By the time we get to Genesis chapter 16, 10 years have elapsed. So from Genesis 12 to Genesis 16, they've been there now 10 years. They've heard the promise 10 years ago. 10 years from hearing the promise to Genesis chapter 16. Now watch what happens 10 years later. I'm going to bless you real good. 10 years later, Sarai says to Abram, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her, I can build a family. And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So in 16:2, Sarai says, let me build a family. She says, go to my slave, I can build a family. I need you to see what she says. God said, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you a great nation. I'm going to give you a great multitude. 10 years later, she has no child. So she says, I'll build a family. I need you to see what she's saying. I'm going to do it, this 16:2. Now go to Genesis chapter 21:1. That's 16:2. That sound like faith to y'all? Because it sure don't sound like faith to me. This 21:1, so that's 16:2. I'm going to build a family. But look at Genesis chapter 21:1. This messed me up. 21:1, the Lord came to Sarah. So something's happened between 16:2 and 21:1. Her name went from Sarai to Sarah. That's the first thing that happened. But watch what else happens. The Lord came to Sarah and did as he said. And the Lord did for Sarah what he has promised. So that's faith in 21:1. But in 16:2, that's not faith. We find out in 16:2 that Sarah's barren. She's unable. She's incapable. We find out in 16:2 Sarah is living at a deficit. We found out in 16:2 she's out of time. She's unable. Her body had gone through menopause. She's now post-menopausal. Her timing is off. But more than being barren, she's had to hear the promise now 10 years later. So not only is she incapable, but she's been waiting for 10 years, having not experienced what God told him that she would experience by mothering children. And it can be a difficult place to navigate, having to hold on to something you look forward to for a long period of time without ever having to put your hand on it. Yeah, it's one thing when I can wait 10 months, but 10 years. Yeah, I'm not sure that I have the longevity, the endurance, the faith to wait 10 years. And so Sarai decides she has some facts. I'm barren. I'm postmenopausal. My biological clock ain't just ticking. The battery died. It don't even work anymore. My biological clock can turn all the way off. And she's incapable. So now she says, my facts make me take matters into my own hands. 16:2. I'll make me a family. I'm going to build me a family. But I need you to see something, because the word she uses for build, I'm going to build a family. That's the same. It comes from the root word, from the same word that God used in Genesis chapter 2 when he said he fashioned a woman from the rib of the man. So what she's saying in Genesis chapter 16:2 is, I heard from God, but now I need to help God be God. Yeah, I heard from him, but since I haven't experienced what he said I'd experience, let me help him out. Because God ain't gotten all the way right now. And so God needs some help. And ain't that like us? Don't we get frustrated, waiting in faith, and decide in my wait, this has been too long, let me help out a little bit. Yeah, let me figure things out a little bit. And so then what we start doing is we don't start doing what faith says, we start doing what our figures say. Because some of us are real good at figuring. Yeah, and so open a business. Well, let me figure if I can do it. Start the thing. Let me figure if I can do it. And so she moves from faith to figuring in 16:2. Let me figure this thing out. And so Sarai shows us what faith looks like when you have major difficulty standing in front of you. Because it's easy to faith things if it's not a difficult process. But if I've got a great difficulty in front of me, then that faithing that is going to be real difficult. It's going to be real hard walking by faith if there's something standing between me and the promise. Sarah has a promise, but Sarah has a gap. I've got a promise, but there's a gap here. And the gap is I don't have the ability to do this thing. The gap is my time has run out. The gap is I can't do what he's saying I'm going to be able to do. Physically, I can't do it. Biologically, I can't do it. Naturally, I can't do it. Matter of fact, God, the thing that you're telling me at this age and stage of my life just sounds ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous to say I'm going to father Abraham, or I'm going to mother Sarah, a whole nation of people, and I ain't got one child. What you mean I'm going to do this great big thing and I ain't got the small thing yet? I don't have one, and you're telling me I'm going to have many? I don't have this. You're telling me I'm going to have that? Like, how in the world am I going to get this done? And here's the problem. The problem is that most times, think about the promise that God has told you. This is what you'll find, is that the promise that you have stands in contradiction to your facts. Yeah. He's given you a promise, and that promise contradicts your facts. Or you contradict the promise. Here it is. I want you to X, Y, and Z, but I'm ratchet. So what you mean you want me to preach if I'm ratchet? You know I'm ratchet, Lord. You know I'm undone. And I'm the one that's going to preach for you? My facts contradict the promise. I want you to have a child. Well, what child? I ain't even married yet. What you mean my child's going to do great things? I'm not even married. So my facts contradict the promise. What you mean, open the business? I don't know nothing about no LLC and S-Corp and all that good stuff. I don't know anything about that stuff, so my facts contradict the promise. So here's the problem, that you got a promise in one hand, but your facts are in the other. You've got a promise in one hand and contradictory fact in the other. You're holding a promise in one hand, and everything you've got in this other hand is contradicting the promise. And so you've got to decide, what do I do with these hands? If I've got fact and contradiction at the same time, I'm old, I'm postmenopausal, I don't have it in me to have kids, but I'm supposed to be a mother of a great nation. What in the world am I going to do with these two things? And what Sarah does is what we do. She goes to figuring. So Sarah's like, okay, well, 10 years, and I ain't had it, and all right, well, I got to figure this thing out now. So God said, I'm going to have a bunch of kids. I'm going to have Abraham. So Abraham probably, he still got it, but it's something about me then. So if he still got it, but it's something about me, you know what? We were in Egypt. Yeah, where's she at? Hagar. So she calls her slave woman, and she says, I got it. I'm going to make my husband, hard thing, sisters, I'm going to make my husband sleep with my slave to give me a child. So in comes Abram. Come here, Hagar. I need y'all to sleep together so I can get a kid. Y'all good? Abram didn't say no. So Abram like, well, since you said so, I wasn't even looking at her at 75 years. I wasn't looking at your slave girl. I wouldn't even think about her. But since you brought her on up, I guess I'll go ahead and do what you want me to do, babe. So Sarai says, here, give her my slave. What she's doing is customary for her day, because this is what happened. And you got to think about the timing. So in antiquity, in the past, what would happen is if you could not mother or birth children, you were looked at as deficient. You were less than a woman. And so what would happen is if you had servants or slaves, then, or if you were a person of wealth or substance, which they are, you could say, hey, I want you to have a baby with a husband, and I'm going to claim that child as my own because you belong to me, now that baby's mine. And so that was a natural occurrence in that day. Sarai does nothing wrong, nothing not customary for her day, except one thing. She does what's natural. Sometimes the reason that we can't move by faith is because we're doing what's natural, and faith is unnatural. We're doing what's a natural response, and faith is not the natural response. We are, you know what? You make me mad, let me cuss you out because that's natural. And faith says, no, love them that hate you and do good to them that despitefully use you. Faith is unnatural, but we catch ourselves doing what's natural. Yeah, we're just doing what's natural. All Sarah did is what's natural, but faith is unnatural. And so we have to then figure out how to do the unnatural until the unnatural becomes unnatural. That's what walking by faith is. I'm doing the unnatural thing until this unnatural thing becomes the natural way I respond. Yeah, and so I have to put myself in a place where I understand it's unnatural, but then I don't mind being unnatural, because if I'm unnatural and that's natural, I want to be supernatural. Yeah, and so she says, let me put myself in a supernatural place. And so that's what moving by faith is, that I'm moving from a natural place into a supernatural place until this supernatural place becomes my natural place. That's what moving by faith is. And so she says, I can't produce it. I've got the raw materials, but they don't work. And since I don't see how what I have in here is going to produce what God said I'd be able to produce out there, Sarai makes a decision to have Abram partner with Hagar because she believes she's going to mother a nature. She believes she's going to mother a great nation. She believes she's going to mother. Now, this is what we miss. Go back to 16:2 for me real quick. Genesis 16:2. This is what you miss is she believes, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave, perhaps through her I can build a family, because what has she been told? You will mother a great nation. So she believes in the promise. The problem is not she doesn't believe in the promise. The problem is she's not committed to the process. That's the problem. Yeah. The problem is not that she doesn't believe the promise. The promise is she's not committed to the process. And so you've got to decide, do I believe the promise? That's the first question. And the second question is, am I committed to the process? Do I believe the promise? And am I committed to the process? And so she's not fully committed to the process. So she, at this point, does not have the faith to overcome the gap of her ability or her inability. She has a promise, but she hasn't fully committed to the process. Now, this is what happens. She says, Abram, go ahead and have a baby. Abram goes into Hagar. First night she get pregnant. Good God Almighty. And so Hagar's pregnant, and now there's a relationship between Hagar and Sarai that goes haywire. Now, Hagar and Sarah, they have had a good relationship up until Hagar gets pregnant. And now that Hagar is pregnant, Hagar begins to look at Sarah down her nose. Yeah, she walk around the house pregnant, belly sticking out, looking at her. What's up, Sarai? Yeah. Husband got me pregnant. What's wrong with you? Why can't he get you pregnant? And so Sarai now is looking at Hagar like, hold up, Abraham, this is your fault now. This is your fault. The reason she's looking at me like this is your fault. Abram says, well, do with it what is right. And so she begins to mistreat Hagar. And in Genesis chapter 16, Hagar runs away. This is what you miss about Hagar. Hagar runs away, and Sarai's lack of faith in 16:2 produces an experience of faith for Hagar later on in chapter 16. I want you to see it. Hagar now is on the run because Sarai's been mistreating her. Hagar's on the run. She's running away from Sarai. She's being mistreated. And the angel of the Lord appears to her and says, Hagar, where you going? I'm running away. What do you mean, where am I going? I'm getting all the way up out of here. I am running away. Do we have 16, verse 11? Let's look at 16, verse 11. The angel of the Lord said to her, you have conceived. This Hagar he's talking to, she's run away. And now this is the word of the Lord to Hagar. You have conceived and will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your cry of affliction. What this word Ishmael means is the Lord has heard. So Ishmael means God has heard. Hagar's run away. The angel of the Lord shows up. You're pregnant with the son. Name him Ishmael, because I heard you. Let's go to chapter 16 and 12. Let's go to the next verse. This man will be like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. He will settle near all his relatives. Now let's go to 16 and 13. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, you are El Rohi. For she said, in this place, have I actually seen the one who sees me? This name means God sees. So hold on. The thing that happens after these names is that the angel of the Lord says, now go back to Sarai and Abram. So Hagar gets back to Sarai and Abram. But what does Hagar have going back to Sarai and Abram that she did not have when she left? She has a 4-word sermon when she gets back. Because she ran away, the angel of the Lord shows up and sends her back with a 4-word sermon. Because when she gets back, I bet the conversation went something like this. Hey, Hagar, where you been? Where you been, girl? We've been looking for you. And so she comes back, and she gets there. I ran away because I was scared. And what happened when you was out there? Well, you know what? When I was out there, something strange did happen. I ran into the angel of the Lord. You ran into the angel of the Lord? You mean the same one that told me to get up and leave? What did he say? Because when he showed up with me, he gave me something. He told me something. What did he tell you? Oh, what did he tell me? This is what he told me. God sees and God hears. And so what happens is Hagar gets mistreated, goes out into the wilderness. God shows up, gives her a sermon, says God sees and God hears. Because what have Sarai and Abram forgotten? That God sees and God hears. And so Sarai's mistreatment of Hagar causes Hagar to go into a place where now she has a faith experience with God. And her faith experience is that God sees and God hears. So when she gets back home where she belongs and they ask her what her experience has been, they can preach to them God sees and God hears, because that's what they needed to be able to move in faith, is knowing that God sees and God hears. You waited 10 years, but God sees and God hears. You waited 25 years for it, but God sees and God hears. You don't know how you're going to do it, but God sees and God hears. And every time they think about Hagar, all they're going to think is that God sees and God hears. Yeah, that she goes back with the sermon. God sees and God hears. So her faith experience went to encourage Abram and Sarai that we're going to continue to walking, because he's not just a God that provides. He's a God that sees and hears. He's not just a God that calls and commissions. He's a God that sees and hears. He's not just a God that sets up and establishes. He's a God that sees and hears. And if ever I get too low, I don't think about Abraham. I think about Ishmael. Because when I think about Ishmael, I'm encouraged that God sees and God hears. That when I don't feel like he sees me, God sees and God hears. So she goes back to preach a sermon, and it's at this point, chapter 17. Can you go to chapter 17? Because something happens in chapter 17. This is verse 5 of chapter 17. You will no longer be Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I will make you the father of many nations. Keep going. That's 17 and 5. So he just doesn't change Abram's name, but eventually he's going to give Abram some instructions. And right around verse 15, he says to Abraham, as for your wife Sarai, do not call her Sarai anymore. Start calling her Sarah. She's 75 years old. By the time her name's changed, he's 85 and she's 75, and both their names changed completely. Why the name change now? Abram means exalted father. Abraham means father of a multitude. Sarai means like offshoot. It means it's like a branch. It means offshoot or branch. It means extension is what Sarai means. But Sarah means princess. So hold up. Exalted father and extension. Who's the exalted father? The name wasn't given because Abraham is the exalted father. Abraham's the son of the exalted father. So Abram's name's pointing to Terah, his father. Watch it. The name Abram is pointing to his exalted father, Terah. Terah produced Abraham, named him Abraham. Abraham is still a baby at this point, so Terah becomes the exalted father. So Abram's name has to point back to where he came from. Watch it. Sarai's name means extension. Extension of what? Extension of wherever she came from. We don't know who her parents were, but wherever and whoever her parents were, she is an extension of them. And so what does God then say? He says, look, you've been walking in the promise, so because you've been walking in the promise and forgot about the promise and started moving in fact and not faith, now I've got to change your name to fully disconnect you of everything in your past. So I'm disconnecting you from what you were an extension from. I'm disconnecting you from who your father was, and now I'm making you a father. I'm calling her a princess because every princess becomes a queen that will produce a king. And that's why he changed the name. He changed their names. Now, the question is, why change the name now? Why would I need my name changed? This is what you missed. The reason they need their name changed is because people are going to call them by their name. You missed it. The reason they have to have the name change, what do people call you? They call you by your name. So because they have moved in fact when his name was Abram, and because he's moved in fact when her name was Sarai, now every time you hear your name's now attached to the promise. Father of the nation, princess. So now every time anybody calls you, you don't just hear what you came from. You heard the promise you're headed towards. You don't just hear what you extended from. You hear the promise that you're connected to. So now every time somebody says your name, all you hear is, I got promise on me. I got promise in me. Sarai comes Sarah. Abram becomes Abraham. So every time somebody, Mr. Abraham, oh, Mr. Promise One, that's what you call me. Mr. Father of a nation. Mr. Father of a multitude. Mr. King, that's what you call me. Oh, Sarai, Sarah, Miss Sarah. Oh, you call me Miss Princess. You call me Queen. You call me Great Mother. You call me Promised One. And so God goes through his name-changing process so you won't walk in your history, but you'll walk in your destiny. That's why he changed the name. I got to change your name because your name's too connected to your history. I got to connect you to something that'll allow you to see your destiny and walk in destiny even when your facts are wrong. Even when the fact is wrong. I've got to give you a name that'll make you walk in destiny. So what happens after they change the name? That's chapter 16 and 17. Chapter 16 and 17 shows up. God changed the name, and then something happens in chapter 18. We're talking about Sarah's faith. Because up until now, Sarah does not look faithful. Chapter 18 of Genesis. 3 men show up, 2 angels, and the angel of the Lord show up to Abraham. They say, Abraham, listen, about a year from now, Sarah's going to be pregnant. Right. Abraham laughs. No, she's not. Ain't no way, no way. You mean, tell me, now that she is that dumb near 90 years old, she got a baby now, and I'm almost 100, and she going to get pregnant by me? Listen, I know what's going on in my body. She's not getting pregnant by me. I did the best I could, God. Why can't we just let the promise go through Ishmael? He says, that's not what I told you. That's not what I told you. So Abraham rushes around. He's getting things ready. And then Sarah is sitting back in the tent. She's hiding behind the tent. And these men come and Abraham has made them a meal. He's gotten everything prepared for them. He set it up for them, set their table. And now they're eating. And Sarah's hiding behind the tent. And she's hearing them tell Abraham exactly what's going to happen in a year. And Sarah doesn't say a word. She just watches. And the Bible says that within herself, not audible, in silence, Sarah laughs. And she says to herself, within herself, not out loud, what in the world does he mean? The Lord's going to bring my pleasure now? And so the angel of the Lord hears her silence and says, why did your wife laugh? Y'all hear what I said? The angel of the Lord heard her silence and said, why did your wife laugh? And then she, embarrassed, says, I didn't laugh. What you talking about? I didn't laugh. No, you did laugh. You laughed because you don't believe it. And this was the question. The question he asked in 18 and 14, you need to write this down. Everybody, I need you to write down Genesis 18 and 14. You need to write this down word for word. Genesis 18 and 14. Write it down in your car. Write it down in your phone. Write it down in a note. You need Genesis 18 and 14. If you don't have any other verse, you need Genesis 18 and 14. Because this is what Genesis 18 and 14 says. As God has now changed their name, Sarah has laughed. God showed back up to reaffirm the promise. This is what happens. In 18 and 14, this is the question that God asked. Is there anything impossible for God? You need to write that down. And here's why you need to write that down. Because every promise you have, there is something attached to that promise. That is your answer to this question. Is there anything too hard for God? If you are walking in promise, The thing that will keep you out of the promise is not answering this question. Is there anything too hard for God? That's 18 and 14. So some things have to happen. We're in 18. We started in 16 and 2. Sarai decides, I'm at a deficit. Let me build my family. But in 21:1, the Lord shows up and he does exactly what he said he would do. That's 5 chapters. So in 5 chapters, we've seen first, she tried to figure it out. She can't get it figured out. It makes a mess in her home. But Hagar comes back with a 4-part sermon to say God sees, God hears. Don't forget that. God sees, God hears. So God gives them a sermon through Hagar. God sees, God hears, and then he changes their name so that everywhere they go, anytime anyone calls their name, they're reminded of the promise they carry so they don't have to deny the fact. They can look at the fact and still walk in faith because I'm attached to the promise. So that's the name change. Some other things are going to unravel because Sarah laughs at the promise because now it's 10, 12, 15 years later and she still does not believe the promise. Because when they show up and say in 1 year she's going to get pregnant, she laughs. What do you mean I'm going to get pregnant in a year? And so this is now chapter 18. So 3 chapters after chapter 18 is 21 when God shows up and does exactly what he said he would do. So what happens between chapter 18 and chapter 21? What's happening between chapter 16 and chapter 21? What's happening between these 5 chapters will give us the answer to our question of why Sarah's called faithful in Hebrews chapter 11 and 11. Because that's where we started, was Hebrews 11 and 11. Sarah is faithful, but she don't look faithful when we meet her. She don't look faithful in 16 and 2. She don't look faithful in 17. She don't look faithful in chapter 18, laughing at the angel of the Lord and laughing at the promise. She don't look faithful. So where is this big, like if she's in the Hall of Fame of faith, I expect some good faith to show up somewhere in the Bible. Like, show me something that you deserve to be on this list. Of all these great faith walkers, I haven't seen anything yet. And so this is what happens. If you're following the text, you go to 18 or you go to 21:1. The Lord came to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. What you've missed that has happened is everything in chapter 20. In chapter 20, Abraham and Sarah go to Gerar. They get there and Abimelech is king. Abram says, even at 90 years old, Sarah fine in the mug. She fine. Matter of fact, Sarah's so fine, my life in jeopardy. That's how fine she is. So he says, Sarah, tell them you are my sister. Now, he's already done this before in Genesis chapter 12 when they had to go to Egypt. In Genesis chapter 12, they went to Egypt. He got to Egypt. Pharaoh said, ooh, she fine in the mud. She fine. And so Abram knows this in Genesis chapter 12. And so his scheme in 12 is, hey, you tell them you my sister because they'll kill me if you don't, all right? And so what happens is Abram tells her in Genesis chapter 12, Sarai, tell them you my sister. Tell me my sister so I don't die. She says, okay. So when they get to Egypt, this chapter 12, she says, oh, that's just my brother. I'm his sister. And so Pharaoh says, ooh, girl, well, come on to my house then, girl. What you doing out here with him? You need to come on and be with me. So he takes her with him, and God inflicts Pharaoh. He plagues him until he lets her go. And then Pharaoh says, I got to get this woman out of my house. She is no good for me. So he gets her all the way out. He finds out who her husband is. He said, man, take your wife, take these goods, take these slaves, take all this stuff, get up out of here because of this woman. Because this woman, she brought affliction to my house. That's Genesis chapter 12. That's Abram and Sarai. But now in Genesis chapter 20, they're Abraham and Sarah. Now they're not just walking in the promise, they're identified by the promise. And what happens? Abraham starts doing what he was doing pre-promise. I need you to see it. he's doing what he was doing before the promise. Hey, tell them again, you my sister. Okay, worked the first time, maybe worked the second time. So they tell Abimelech, oh, that's just my sister, that's my brother. Girl, what you mean? Come on, be with me. Yeah, you don't need to be with no Abraham, you need to be Abimelech. Abimelech's the name, you need to be with me. And so he brings her with him, and God shows up in a dream and says, you better not touch her. If you touch her, I'm going to kill you. If you mess with her, you're going to die. Not only are you going to die, but after the dream, God moves again. And now everybody that could reproduce can't reproduce. But did you catch why? Look at Genesis chapter 20 and verse 18. This is the last verse before God moves for Sarah. I need you to hear it. This is the last verse before God moves for Sarah. 2018, for the Lord had completely closed all the wombs in Abimelech's household. Why? On account of Sarah. If you go all the way back to Genesis 12, the reason he afflicts Pharaoh was because Sarah ain't had nothing to do with Abraham. The reason he shuts Abimelech's house down was because of Sarah, not Abraham. So because Sarah has seen twice, God shut stuff down for her. Because Sarah has seen twice, pre-promise and in the promise, God closed wombs because of her. She makes a decision, because what does Hebrews 11 say about Sarah? Go back to Hebrews 11:11. By faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, it's going to mess you up, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since what? She considered. So if you're trying to figure out how she makes the move from faithless Sarah to faithful Sarah, the thing that lets her make the move, she considered. Yeah, because what she did was, between Genesis 20 and 18 and 21 and 1, between Genesis 20 last and 21 first, she considered. Somewhere in that pocket of space, she considered. What did she consider? She considered, when I was in Egypt, God shut Egypt down to get me out. Okay, that must mean God is faithful. When I made Hagar get pregnant by Abram, God sent Hagar back to me to preach a sermon to me so I can be encouraged. She told me God sees and God hears. That must mean God is faithful. After I did that, God then changed my name to disconnect me from my past to connect me to my destiny. That must mean God is faithful. I laughed in God's face at God's promise, and God still showed up to give me exactly what he said I'd do. That must mean God is faithful. When I was in Gerar and another man was going to make me his wife, sleep with me, God showed up, got me out of there, and shut the whole city down just to get me out. That must mean God is faithful. And the reason that Sarah moves from faithlessness to faithfulness is she looked back over her life and everything that she considered. She said, that must mean God is faithful. That because God gave me courage when I had no encouragement, that must mean God is faithful. Because God let me graduate high school when they said I would never make it, that must mean God is faithful. When God gave me a college degree when they said I wasn't good enough for a GED, that must mean God is faithful. When God gave me a wife when I was a whore in these streets, that must mean God is faithful. When God gave me children when I didn't deserve to reproduce, that must mean God is faithful. That faith makes perfect sense. That if I consider everything that I have been through and everything that God has done, that must mean God is faithful. If I consider where I've been and I consider where I am, that must mean God is faithful. If I look at what I used to have and look at what I have right now, that must mean God is faithful. That I have considered it all, and that must mean God is faithful. Yeah, that the way she moves from faithlessness into faithfulness is she moves from the thinking that faith is mystical. Because when we talk about moving in faith, we think, oh, I gotta do all this. Hold on, I gotta turn in circles this way, and I gotta turn in circles that way. Oh, and I gotta say the right words. No. Faith makes sense. We say so much that faith don't make sense. Hebrews 11:11 says it does. Because she reached faith by the consideration of who God is. Yeah. When she looked at who God was, there's no way I can't believe it. There's no way I can't believe in him. If I just look at who he is, if I dwell on what his nature is, if I think about who God really is, if I think of all the things that God has done, if I think of all the ways that he made, faith makes sense. If I think of how he repaired my heart, if I think about how he fixed my mind, if I think about how he ripped addiction from my hand, faith makes sense. If I think about everything that God has ushered me out of and ushered me into, if I think about the way he's fixed my heart that was broken, faith makes sense. But we tell ourselves a lie, it doesn't, because we don't understand what moving in faith is. Faith means that I've considered who God is. And after I've considered it all, I rested on he's faithful. That I thought about my life and what my life has been and where my life has gone and where my life was. And even though I'm not where I desire to be, I found myself resting on he's faithful. That when I'm not able, he's still faithful. When I'm incapable, he's still faithful. When I'm angry, frustrated, he's faithful. That when I'm confused and angry and upset, he's faithful. That when I don't know which way to turn or where to go, he's faithful. That when I can't figure all the details out, he's faithful. That when I don't know how the promise is going to come to be, he's faithful. That I need you to consider his character. And he did not bring me out of all of that and not be able to do this. And since he got me out of all of that, I know this is a small thing. And as soon as she landed on God's faithful, he showed up. Because 8:20 last, he shows up and brings her out. 21 first, God did exactly what he said he was going to do. He was waiting on her to land on his character. Did you hear what I just said? The reason that it took so long for Isaac to be manifested is not because Sarah needed to age. God needs Sarah to land on his character. Before now, she wasn't resting on his character. Before now, she wasn't resting on who he is. Before now, she had not considered it all. Before now, she had not decided, I'm going to stand on this thing. But the moment she does, and she says, no matter what my life has looked like, he's faithful. The very next thing that happens, God showed up. As soon as she landed on, hear it. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. Egypt, Canaan, Hagar, low self-esteem, anxiety, worry, fear, rejection. And then after all that, he changed my name and called me a princess. He shut down an entire city and wouldn't let them reproduce till they let me go. that he would rather reverse the laws of nature than to be found unfaithful to his own word. That he will bring back to life everything that died, even if it was dying in me, to bring me to the promise. He's faithful. And as soon as she steps on it, God shows up and does exactly what he said he would do 25 years ago. I told you 25 years ago I was going to do it. And the only thing I was waiting on was for you to settle on who I am. And God said, I told you I'd do it. I'm waiting on you to settle on who I am. And as soon as you settle on who I am, as soon as you settle on what I can do, as soon as you can settle on where I said you'd go, as soon as you can settle on everything I said you'd walk out of, as soon as you settle on me, I'll show up for you. Will you settle on me? Will you settle on me? This one